You're raised in the Bronx.
Yep.
Go to court with your mom, watch criminal cases. What was it about those experiences that inspired your career path?
Well, I will say that I probably did not understand much of what I was seeing when I was in those courtrooms. The first fun part was just being with my mom, but what I saw until I realized that it was serious was a play with people battling about what I understood ultimately was the ability of some guy to go home. And so it had all the drama, right, that one could expect. It was only when I realized that the consequences were significant. In other words, I knew that liberty was at stake, but when I saw someone I knew, who was the star of the play, the defendant, it moved me. It was someone I both knew and loved. It was a friend of one of my brothers. And at that point I said, this is serious stuff. I believe strongly that people who are poor should have good lawyers. And so I said, I think all of 11 and a half or 12 years old, I'm going to be a public defender. And that's what I did.
Nice. So what was it about that feeling of going there with your mom?
You know, my mother, my mother was very close to me. She raised us alone, there were 5 of us total. And so I had a lot of regard for her, and I had a lot of regard for what she was interested in. I was pretty annoying probably as a child. I liked to follow her. And she was moved by the significance of what we were watching. And that's why she spent her time there. And you know, it was probably a little, partly to satisfy my mom, but ultimately I just agreed that there was something about putting people in cages that was very serious, and if it was going to be done, it should be done only after someone had exhausted all their rights. So for me, I was almost ashamed of how much I enjoyed it, but I certainly understood how significant it was, and so, you know, you got to commit your life to something. At that time, it was going to be criminal justice.
Mm-hmm. So you became a public defender, and now you're an advocate for NBA players. Differences there, obviously, but there are similarities as well.
Yeah, being a lawyer and having clients and advocating for the client, especially if you're a trial lawyer, not a transactional lawyer, that's the similarity. I mean, I, as the executive director of the Players Association, and much of my job is to advocate for their being treated fairly by the league and other stakeholders. So there's certainly that similarity. Obviously, my clients, they're not clients in the traditional sense of the word, but they are a different body of people that I'm representing. When I was a public defender, I represented people who were, you know, largely very young, obviously very poor, and engaged, or at least alleged to have been engaged in criminal activity. The players I represent now obviously are not engaged in criminal activity. They are magnificently successful men and women, and we're simply seeking justice, not in the context of a criminal justice system, but we are seeking justice. And so I sometimes think my job has not really changed, or my former job has prepared me for this job. There are similarities, but there are some significant differences.
Sure. So what then makes you a good advocate for the players?
The easiest part is I absolutely adore what they do and respect what they've become. I have, as a lawyer, not merely a public defender, but as a lawyer, even when I represented Fortune 100 companies, you may not have passion for the client. You have passion for their right to a fair result, but you may not have passion for the client. With the players, I actually have passion for the players. I frequently tell people that, you know, my most difficult day since I've been on this job is immediately rendered superb when I have a call or a meeting with a player. They are remarkable men, and it is my regard for them that makes me not merely get up in the morning, but get up with a smile on my face to some extent in the morning, because I really love the work I do, and I love the people I'm working for.
So what has it meant for you to become the first woman to lead a major sports union?
Frankly, it didn't really mean much when I was sort of by myself applying for the position. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking, wow, if I get this, I'll be, right? I just wanted the job because I thought it would be a fabulous job, and I wanted very much to work with the players. Once I got the job and the attention came, I said, yeah, that's right, you are the first woman to head. And so, you know, I had planned to work as hard as my soul would allow at this job, because that's sort of how I approached this job, how I think I've approached every job. I kind of now think, well, you doubly need to do it because there are other women watching you, there are other men watching you, and I guess even more importantly, there are young women, young girls that are watching me. I was going to succeed anyway, but I now have a sort of an extra boost because I want to make sure that no one can say the reason she failed was because she was a woman. They will say she succeeded, and wow, isn't it cool? She's also a woman.
So you see yourself as an inspiration.
I didn't wake up intending to, but I'm told that I can be, and there's a responsibility therefore to be. And so, yeah, I hope I do inspire women. I hope I inspire men to understand and appreciate that women can do a job, any job, as well as a man can. And so, yeah, it's an added responsibility. Wasn't really thinking much about it at the time, but I happily embrace it.
So, what does it mean to you to have been voted in by players? This is men's basketball. This is obviously dominated by men,
Yeah.
and they specifically chose you, a woman, to be their leader.
Well, that's sort of greater validation. I mean, I have over the years been hired, by a company's general counsel to handle a matter that was of significance to the company, and as a woman, that's great. This time, it's voices within the union, within the association, within the entity that could have said, let's go elsewhere, and they voted for me. So, it's not instant credibility, it's not instant validation, but at least gives me the ability to say, I wasn't thrust upon anyone. They took a look, I had to present, I was interviewed, and they said, you're our gal. It's a little bit more affirming.
That's great. That's great. So you highlighted that fact during the process.
I knew I couldn't ignore it. All right. I mean, frankly, if no one had asked, there was one or two things I could have done. I could have not said anything, and stupidly assumed nobody was thinking about it. I knew clearly that they were thinking about it, and rather than have anyone think, oh, it would be impolite or politically incorrect to bring it up, I said, let's talk about it. I am a girl. And let me tell you why that shouldn't trouble you if it is. Let me tell you why, it makes me a very strong candidate because of all the things I've had to deal with to get to this place. I am not a weenie. I have never been a weenie. And I guarantee you that if anyone thinks I am, they will regret it. So, of course I talked about it. It would have been insane not to know, not assume, but know that every man that came into that room and saw me didn't say, wow, she's a girl.
Well, I can already get the sense of why you are inspiring, but the players talked about how you rallied them. Can you talk about that process? I mean, that must feel good.
I guess after I sort of reviewed the circumstances surrounding my predecessor's departure from the union, I knew that these were guys that were had to be to some extent, demoralized. They'd been without an ED for over a year by then. And I not hand-holding, but they needed to hear that, you are not broken, you're not even bent, you are going to be fine. And I also know you're not going to make the mistake of hiring someone that's going to simply replicate the person that you got rid of. And let me tell you why. It's because I'm not in this job for me. I'm not here because I have some desire to break a ceiling. What I said to them was, I have and will continue to both respect and admire and understand that I'm going to be working for you. I respect you. What happened with my predecessor will never happen on my watch. I mean, these are men that know that they are of substance. All of us need to be reminded of that sometimes. And perhaps during that presentation, it felt good to have someone say what they all know to be true, that you are a force to be reckoned with. And I fully appreciate that, and I would love the opportunity to help you remind the world of that. So, it's easy. They're a great group of guys. It's hard not to admire them.
So you came in, getting into more of the business side now, you came in after a negotiation in which the players kind of lost a fair amount.
Yeah.
But now you're entering a potential in a couple of years where they can try to get some of that back. NBA's teams have never been as valuable as they are now. How many of them were valued over $1 billion? They just signed this big television deal. The salary cap is going to balloon, and you have an opportunity in 2 years to potentially opt out of the collective bargaining agreement.
Yep.
Where are you in conjunction with the league? Where are you in that process? Have you guys talked about it? Is there a negotiation kind of that's begun already?
Well, the first thing I needed to do, because I wasn't here, obviously, when the last CBA was negotiated, was to understand what happened, what I've been referring to as an autopsy. And so I had to do a number of other things as well. I had to meet the people I'm working for. I had to put together a senior management team. But I've also gone about the business of conducting that autopsy. So every key player on our side that was engaged in that process is being debriefed by me and by my team. I've had conversations with people on the other side that were engaged in the negotiations. And so the first thing to do is understand what happened. The second thing to do is to figure out what it is that the players want to see happen come the next round of negotiations. And we've begun that process. I've got to listen. I'm not telling them what they need to have done. I'm listening to what they want to see happen in the next negotiation. And then finally, I have had discussions with the commissioner. He and I agree that we don't want a work stoppage. And so we will sit down, not on the eve of the opt-out or on the eve of a potential lockout, but sooner rather than later, and begin to try to talk about some issues that we can hopefully agree on. If not, begin to have discussions to see if we can get to some meeting of the minds. My own view is, and I'm not saying this because I think it necessarily happened in prior negotiations, but if there is an issue or issues that are now ripe for discussion, we should talk about it. Nobody wants a stoppage, the fans probably more than anyone else. And I think if we can resolve that the issues that exist can be negotiated in 2015 or 2016, then we can avoid a lockout in 2017. So we are approaching having some sit-downs. We haven't begun them, but we've at least begun to agree that we want to do this in a way where, as grown-ups, we can resolve things without having to strike or lock out, if we can. There's going to be a deal struck, right? It's a question of whether it's going to be struck before opt-out, after opt-out, after a lockout, after a strike, but there's going to be a deal struck. Logic would suggest you get the deal struck sooner rather than later, and I think the commissioner and I agree that that's what we should aim for.
So avoiding a lockout, avoiding a stoppage hinges on, between now and the summer of 2017, regularly meeting, perhaps knocking out some of the maybe more minor issues so you could sit down and get the bigger, it's the revenue split.
It's always, to some extent, based on the split of revenue. There are some other issues that are equally important. And you said get the smaller issues knocked out first. The smaller issues are probably the ones you can afford to delay. It's the bigger issues, because those are the ones, right, that lead to a work stoppage. So, I don't know that that's not something we could begin discussions about even in this year. And the good news is that the commissioner said that he and his people would be prepared to do that. So we'll see.
Great. Are you worried at all if there's a stoppage, how the players might be viewed? You're leading the players, and there's another stoppage, and you talked about the fans. Are you worried at all about the perception? Not
now, because one of the things that I'm witnessing, several things I'm witnessing. One, I think our game is very popular, and our players are more popular than ever. The season thus far has been exciting, and so there's a lot of love, right, going on. And number two, I'm going to not avoid the narrative that people have about the relationship between the players and the game, the players and the owners. I know that the players make good money. I mean, no one I think is belittling them that. But I think all that the fans have not been provided information about is just how much money the industry makes, and need to be reminded of the players' contribution. So, I will concede that there have been some negative stories about the players in the past. I'm going to try my best to undo some of those untruths, and we're going to do it very aggressively. So I'm confident by the time 2017 there's any work stoppage, that we will have a different world view of the players and their interest than unfortunately was the case in 2011.